Today, me and Tuck are going to show you how to force your tomatoes to ripen early and your plants to keep producing all season long. Let's go! Take a look at my tomato trellis. Look at all the tomatoes on here. So many are ripe and ready to be picked. Here's how I get my tomatoes to ripen earlier. The first technique is for indeterminate vining tomatoes. What I do is an advanced version of pruning. This forces my tomato plants to produce 2 weeks earlier than plants that are not pruned. I start by pruning the tomato to grow up one single stem. I do this by removing the suckers when the plant is young. You can see I'm growing this tomato up one main stem. Then off that main stem, I allow some suckers to grow in the center, like you see here, and also at the top. That provides some shade for the fruit. This way the fruit doesn't get Sunscald, which is essentially sunburn on the tomatoes. This is especially important for your beefsteak tomatoes in the southern states. Pruning the tomato plants will help redistribute the growth energy from leaf production and shoot growth over to fruit production and ripening. It's like telling your tomato plants to focus on ripening the fruit that they have and also creating more fruit rather than putting all of their attention into growing a bunch of suckers and leaves. You will notice that I remove a lot of the lower leaves. This is important because leaves that are in contact with the soil can get disease issues and spread that up the plant. By removing the lower leaves, we're allowing these plants to get better airflow and better light. This air can then move up the plant, and this allows the plants to dry out quicker after a rain and helps prevent disease problems. Another thing I will do is whenever I see leaves with disease problems on them, like you see this leaf right here, I will go out and cut that leaf and remove it. But before I do that, I will take my pruners and I'll spray them with some isopropyl alcohol just to make sure that I disinfect them. I'll go out and I'll remove any of the leaves that have diseases on them. Then I'll take these leaves and I'll throw them in the garbage and remove them from the property. This way the disease isn't spreading up the plant and isn't spreading from plant to plant. Reducing disease issues allows your plants to produce later into the season because they won't be stunted or killed by disease. Your plants can focus on growth and production rather than focusing so much of their attention on combating disease issues. Pruning your plants also allows the fruit to receive more sunlight. You can see how loaded these sets are and how beautiful they look. When it comes to your beefsteaks though, as you see right here, you don't want them to get too much sunlight that they get Sunscald. So like this one back here, we're giving it a little bit of filtered sunlight. When it comes down to it though, fruit that gets more sunlight can ripen quicker, and fruit that gets more direct sunlight is higher in vitamin C. You might be thinking pruning your tomatoes will lead to less fruit overall, but I have a trick for that. This is something that I just started doing the last few years. What I do is I grow that plant up a single stem, like you see here. Then for some of the suckers, I allow them to grow and I allow them to flower and fruit. Then I'll cut off after the fruit. This way I can get some additional fruit from that sucker, but it's not turning into a whole nother plant and isn't making my plant super bushy. Here's another example where I allowed a sucker to grow and then I allowed it to fruit, and then I cut it off right after the fruit, allowing myself to get bigger harvests on these plants without having them bush out too much. So this is helping me to increase my overall yield without having the plant grow so many tops in different directions. When it comes down to it though, growing tomatoes vertically and pruning them will actually have a lower yield per plant than allowing a plant to sprawl out. But if you allow a plant to just sprawl out on the ground, that's going to take up about 4 feet. If you grow plants vertically and prune them, you could grow 4 plants in 4 square feet. So technically, the yield is going to be higher for that 4 square foot by growing vertically than growing 1 plant, even though the yield per plant is lower. When it comes down to it though, it's all about getting the most out of our space. So by growing like this, we can get a higher yield per square foot. Another thing that I do, which makes growing this way so fantastic, is notice this tomato, how loaded it is. We'll keep moving our way up and how beautiful the color is. This is the red torch tomato. When it starts to get super tall to the point where it's growing above the trellis, I can take this right here, this roller hook, pull it like that, and then drop the tomato down. This is known as lowering and leaning. Because tomatoes are vines, they take to this really well. What this does is allows the plant to drop down, and I can easily manage the fruit and get to it. And it's like growing a 10 or 12 foot tomato plant with only about 6 or 7 feet of height. And then if you go down, you'll notice that this doesn't really bother the tomato. The tomato just ends up leaning, and it can take this. And over time, the fruit's just gonna be up here. It's gonna be much easier to manage, much easier to grab, much easier to work on this plant when it's at head height. When growing any plants, you want to make sure you know your area and you're making adjustments based on your specific climatic conditions. For instance, if you live further in the south, like Texas or something, you're going to want to have your tomatoes have more shade on them, leaving more suckers at the center to provide some of that shade. I have grown tomatoes and allowed them to sprawl, like you see right here. This is a Sunscald cherry tomato. When you allow them to sprawl, you can see they take up a lot more space, and then these leaves are dragging on the ground a little bit more. That gives a higher likelihood of your plants getting some disease issues. If you're going to do that, make sure you have some wood chips down. You can see this plant has a lot of fruit on it, but it's also taking up a lot of space. Another way to ensure that you have tomatoes that ripen early and produce late is to grow the right varieties. Early ripening varieties, like this one right here, the Sakura tomato, is known to ripen earlier than a lot of the other ones. It's always one of the first ones, probably the first one, to ripen in my garden. So simply by growing varieties that ripen early, you can ensure that you're gonna get earlier ripening fruit. Pretty obvious, pretty simple, but super convenient, and I mean, it's the way to do it. The little boss is looking for a snack. He knows it's time to grab something. Let's get him a cucumber. This guy's always out here working hard. He truly deserves it. What do you think, boy? Want a fresh cuke? Come up here. Look at some of these sets of cucumbers here. Look how beautiful that is. 3 perfect cucumbers right next to each other. We'll harvest this one right here. This is like perfect time to harvest this thing. It doesn't get much better than that in my opinion. What do you think, Tuck? Snap it off for this guy. Swing him around here. Let him go to work. If you love seeing Tuck in the videos, make sure you spam some hearts down low for the young king. It's hot out here today, not as hot as it's been recently. This guy needs a little fix though, because he's always protecting the garden. He's always working hard. He deserves all the good things because he's the young king. It's good to be king, as they say. To make sure you have tomato plants that will continue to produce late in the season, you want to grow some tomatoes that are indeterminate and will produce up until a frost. I also suggest you grow some hybrid varieties with good disease resistance. One of them is the Mountain Magic tomato. This one is resistant to early blight, fusarium wilt, verticillium wilt, and late blight. Another great disease resistant variety right here is the Super Sweet 100 tomato. Look at the sets on this one. This one is resistant to fusarium wilt and verticillium wilt. It is so important to know your location. I know that where I live, my soil, it has fusarium wilt in it. So if I grow varieties that are resistant to fusarium wilt, not only do the plants do better and produce a lot more, but they grow much later into the season because they don't really have to worry about that disease that's already in the ground. Another way you can avoid soil-borne diseases is you could grow some plants in containers and make your own soil or use a good potting mix. This way you don't have to deal with the disease issue at all. Check out these plants though. You'll notice even between those two, between the Mountain Magic and between the Super Sweet 100, we have the Sunscald cherry in the center. This one has some more disease issues on it, you could see. It's got some disease problems because it doesn't have as good disease resistance as the other two. These plants are so close together, yet the two on the outsides don't have a disease problem and the one does in the center, simply because it's a different variety. Healthy plants have fruit that ripen earlier and continue to produce later in the season because the plants don't have disease issues. They don't have to waste so much energy on combating disease. They can focus on the fruit. In order for our plants to be healthy, we need to provide them with enough nutrition to be able to support all the fruit that they're kicking out. Look how much fruit is on here. What I suggest you do is when your plants start to head into production, you want to go by and top dress your plants with some all-purpose fertilizer. I'll also mix in some bone meal. The bone meal helps the plants with flower production and also fruit production. In addition, the bone meal has some calcium in it that will help prevent your plants from getting blossom end rot. Another thing that's important is after you top dress your plants, you want to put a nice thick layer of mulch down. This will also help prevent blossom end rot, especially if your soil already has adequate levels of moisture, because blossom end rot can come on by uneven watering. You don't want your soil to completely dry out and then come by with a deep watering. Instead, you want to have a mulch down. It will slowly dry out. It won't completely dry out, and then you could come by and water your plants. This will really help with blossom end rot as well. An additional way to ensure that our plants continue to produce late in the season is to make sure that we are watering them at the base. If you water your plants with overhead watering and you're getting the foliage wet, then that could really make the plants more susceptible to disease issues. We want our plants' foliage to remain dry as much as possible. That will help avoid disease. If disease issues aren't your problem, but you're having an issue with the tomato hornworms, you could go out there and pick them off by hand, or you can use this spray. This is BT. This stuff works fantastic for the tomato hornworms, and it won't bother your bees or anything. It just goes after certain kinds of caterpillars that actually eat leaves of plants. So a great option if you're having an issue with the tomato hornworms. Check out this tomato plant. Look at the size of these tomatoes and look how many it has on it. This is the Coralina tomato, the first time I've ever grown it. But man, these tomatoes are absolutely beautiful, massive. The production is insane, really cool shape to them. Tomatoes like to ripen ideally in temperatures between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's just way too hot for you, even at the nights, during the night it's just so hot that they're not ripening, what you can do is grab some of the tomatoes like at this stage or even a little earlier, bring those inside to where the temperatures are about 70 to 75 and then allow them to ripen off the vine. I personally like my tomatoes to ripen on the vine because I live in a good location where the weather is really good for tomatoes to ripen. If you don't live in that location, just adjust what you're doing a little bit to make sure you get some good, delicious tomatoes. Swing to the left a little bit. Check out this tomato. I think this one's the Edox. I really love the color of this tomato. It looks beautiful, they taste great, and the plants are super productive. That's today's video, growers. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you got something out of it. Me and Tuck hope that we provided you with some awesome tricks, tips, techniques, methods to make sure you're getting tomatoes that ripen early, that produce late, and that taste absolutely delicious. It's such a good feeling to be surrounded by tomatoes, especially with how many we have ripe right now. I mean, I'm gonna have to do a harvest video soon because there's just an unbelievable amount of tomatoes that are ripe. We're growing so many different varieties, and it's such a joy to be able to come out here and grab them right off the vine. So ripe, they're just falling off. This is the apple yellow, the first time I've ever grown this one. Really beautiful one. Tuck isn't too happy about all the tomatoes though. He's more of a cucumber guy, a green bean guy, a carrot guy. So he allows us to have all the tomatoes, but he's still out here working hard and protecting all the tomatoes for us. Me and Tuck wanted to send a thank you to one of our new channel members, Norman Ness. Thanks for being a part of Team Grow. Thanks for having your hand in everything we're doing out here. Me and Tuck want to encourage you guys to keep growing, keep sowing, and just keep sticking with it. Even if you feel sometimes that it might not be worth it, we promise that it is. There's very few better feelings than planting something from seed, watching it grow, transplanting it out, and then grabbing a harvest right from it, eating it, being a part of the whole process. It's one of the great, great things in life, in my opinion. We had a blast. One more quick shot at Tuck. This guy's been out here the whole time. He hasn't quit. He hasn't given up. Even though it's a bit hot, I can't keep him inside unless I lock him in there because this guy just never stops. So again, do not forget to spam some hearts down low for the little boss. Tuck and James. We'll be back at you again real soon. We out.